Hey students, welcome to this video. This is a class on the basics of web architecture. You may ask, why is this on a recorded session than a live one? That is because of two reasons. One, originally this class was scheduled for Saturday 3 p.m. IST, and that would have been 1:30 a.m. for me here in California. It's midnight. Even for a guy like me who wakes up early in the morning, 1:30 is a little too early, so I thought I would record it. Why this urgency? You have two sessions coming up on API development and deployment. It's going to be offered by an invited speaker who's going to demonstrate how to develop Node.js APIs using Express Framework. Now, what has API got to do with a basic web architecture, you may ask? That is because all the HTTP calls or requests, as they are called, are routed through a web server, which is a component of the web architecture. So in this class, I'm going to discuss the basics of web architecture, but I'm going to demonstrate only one component of it, the web server. The web server that I'm going to demonstrate would be Nginx. I take that as an example. Why Nginx? Two reasons. One, I use it extensively and I'm very familiar with it. Two, it is highly scalable, used by startups and established organizations, and it is widely preferred by all the new developers in the field. So I'm going to use Nginx as an example. In this class, I'm also going to show you how to create an Amazon EC2 instance, then set up security on that instance so that it can accept HTTP requests. I'm also going to show you how to install Nginx, change the configuration file. Upon changing it, restart it, reload it, those kind of things I'm going to show you. I'm also going to show you some basic commands, Nginx commands. By the end of this video, you must be able to understand fairly what the function of Nginx is, how it routes calls, API calls to the backend APIs, and how to debug issues with it. Some of you may be thinking, I'm going to be a backend developer. Why do I have to learn Nginx? There's a reason for it. You may be planning to become an IT entrepreneur, or you may become an IT executive, team lead, front-end developer, back-end developer, it doesn't matter. If an API is not working, the back-end developer is going to say that his API or her API is working fine. The front-end developer is going to say, I am routing the calls appropriately. The problem is not with me. Now, you need to bring these two people together and help solve the problem. For that, you need to have a decent understanding. If not a very good understanding, you need to have a basic understanding of the web architecture, especially the web server component, the Nginx component of the architecture. So that's the reason why this is really required. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with setting up the instance, install Nginx, and I'm going to show you how to point your domain name with whoever you have registered, point the domain name to the IP address that Amazon assigns us. And also, finally, I'm going to demonstrate a tool called Postman, a tool that not developers, but testers, front-end developers, even end users use to test APIs without writing a single line of code. Now, this is a mandatory video to be watched before taking the API class. Please watch this video. You may be asking, I am watching the video and you are telling me, please watch the video. Okay, I'm not a very bright guy, but you need to understand this. This request is not for you, but to let your friends know. Those students who may not aware, please ask them to watch this video. If you're already familiar with Nginx, if you are already familiar with the basics of web architecture, you don't have to waste your time. But still, I suggest that watch it and refresh your minds. Okay, now let me start sharing the screen and let's get going. Okay, let me start by creating an Amazon instance, EC2 instance. So let me go here. Okay, when you create an Amazon account and come to the dashboard, this is how it is going to look like. In my case, I have a couple of instances running already. Don't worry about it. Let me go and create a new instance. Here it is, launch a new instance. I'm launching a new instance. An instance is nothing but a virtual machine. That's all it is. It's a VM. It will help me to choose the operating system that I prefer for this VM or instance. I'm going to, for example, I can do Amazon Linux or Mac OS, or I can do Enterprise Linux, Ubuntu, Microsoft Windows Server, and so on. But I'm going to choose this because one, I can choose a free tier, and the other one, I don't need a huge instance because this is purely for demonstration purposes. Okay, let me select this. Okay, so let's go with this T2 Micro. It is a free tier eligible. If you look at this, it has got only one virtual CPU and it's 1 gig RAM. That's enough for me. I'm going to choose that. We configure the instance details. The number of instances, 1, and so on. Okay, these things, what you can create your own VPC if you want, but that's all later on. We don't need that now. Let me go ahead and create it, and let me add storage here. Okay, I already got 8 gig of storage, so I don't need more than this for this demo. But if you need more, you can change it here and then get more storage, and that's going to cost you money, and I don't need it. Let me go and add tags. Now, this tag is if I have multiple instances or multiple virtual machines in my account, it's like adding a name tag to the instance. You can just say, oh, call this, for example, I can call this IITJ. To simply say this instance is for demonstration purposes and I'm using it for the IITJ students. So I can go and add tags, but I'm not interested in all those things. This is important. I'm going to add a security group. Look at this. Let me go back. See, it says I'm going to add a security group. The importance of the security group will become clearer to you a little later when I modify the security group. So let me go and create a security group. It's asking for a name, security group name. Let me call this security group name Jodhpur. Okay, I can change the description and so on, but I don't want to do all those things. Here I say review and launch. Okay, it's showing me the options that I have chosen. It gives me an opportunity to tunnel into port 22, SSH into port 22. I'll explain that also a little later. For the time being, pretend that these are clear to you. Let me go ahead and launch. Boom. Okay, this is a little important. Now, to do an SSH tunnel into the virtual machine, I need to create a key pair. I can use an existing key pair, or I can create a new one. I usually don't use the same key pair for multiple instances. I don't like it. I like to create one set of key pair for one instance. So here it is. I'm going to say create a new key pair. The standard is RSA. This ED25, ED25519 it's a little unusual. It's not used. At least I haven't used it, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. Just going to stick with what works for me. RSA is secure enough. I'm going to give a key pair name as Jodhpur. Okay, that's the name of the key pair. And I have to download this key pair now. This is the only opportunity I will get. Look at this. I have to download this. You will not be able to download this file again after it is created. This is the only opportunity. Now, if I lose this, I have to come here and create a new key pair. This is the only opportunity I will get to create and then download. If I lose it, or if I choose not to download it, I have to come here and then create a new key pair. I won't be able to access this existing Jodhpur key pair and then use it. So I'm going to do this and download the key pair. Okay, here it is. It says jodhpur.pem. I'll explain what PEM file is a little later. I'm going to say, boom, launch the instance. Okay, the instances are now launching. Let me go and see what's going on. This is pretty fast, actually. EC2. Okay, instances running is only 2. Remember, I already had 2 instances running. I requested a third instance. It hasn't started yet, I guess. Okay, it's waiting to create that instance. Usually it is pretty fast. It shouldn't take more than 4 or 5 minutes to create a new instance. Okay, instance running. It's still running. So it still hasn't created the instance. In the meanwhile, I can do something even as the instance is being created. This instance is, again, please bear with me. The term instance is used to simply represent a virtual machine. So you create a virtual Linux server through this browser UI and offer the IP address and the key file to the administrator. And from that point on, the Linux administrator is going to take care of the instance. Okay, the instance is still not launched. Instance is running. Clear filter. So let's see. Okay, here it is. It is initializing rather than showing only the instances that are running. This is showing all the instances. This is the instances I just created and it's initializing. It is still not created yet. These two are my other previous instances I was playing around with. I'm going to create a brand new instance for you guys. So this is that instance. Okay, let's see if it is still initializing or it's ready, depending on the load. Okay, still initializing. It may take a few more seconds. Okay, in the meanwhile, I'm going to show you something important about the key file that I just created or downloaded. The key file is called jodhpur.pem. We showed in the folder. Okay, here it is. Okay, this is the file. Now, if you are using Mac to do an SSH into the virtual machine or the EC2 instance, you can straight away use this PEM file. Now, Windows uses what is known as a PPK file. So I have to go create a PPK file from this PEM file. For that, I need to use a tool called PuTTY or PuTTyGen. Now, you can go and Google PuTTY or PuTTyGen, can download it. It's only for Windows. If you are using Mac, I assume a majority of you are using Windows, not Mac. If you are using Windows, you need to convert that PEM file into a PPK file. Okay, in the meanwhile, if you look here, it has created the instance. Jodhpur, come on, I said Jodhpur. Okay, fine. I made a mistake, typo here. I said Jodhpur. Okay, this is the instance that was created. And the IP address for this instance is this. This is an IP address assigned by Amazon by default. If you have your own IP addresses, you can request for a change. But I'm going to go with the default IP addresses. Okay, now let's see how to use this PEM file to create what is known as a PPK file. I told you I'm going to use something called PuTTY. Okay, let me see where the PuTTY is. You can go and download PuTTY and install in Windows. It's pretty straightforward process. I'm not going to get into that. Okay, here it is, PuTTY. I need PuTTyGen. Okay, so I need to use PuTTyGen to convert this PEM file into a PPK file. Let me load this first. All files, Jodhpur, PEM. Okay. Okay, successfully imported the key. All that is fine, no issues, nothing. I say okay. And I'm going to save it as a private key. And again, I'm using the RSA to generate, save private key. It gives me an opportunity to put a password over and above this key file that has been created. Now, I don't want it. The key file itself is secure enough. I'm just going to make sure that I don't need it. So I'm going to say, are you sure you want to save this key without a passphrase? Yes. Okay. See, it converted it to a PPK. I'm going to call it Jodhpur. Okay. So from jodhpur.pem, I have created jodhpur.ppk file. Okay, that is done. Let me see if the file exists. Jodhpur.ppk. Here it is. Come on, not there. Here it is. Jodhpur.ppk. Now I need to use this key to configure PuTTY to do an SSH into the instance. And it's going to be done as follows. If you download PuTTY and install it, you are going to see PuTTY in your laptop or desktop. So open PuTTY, and I'm going to configure the instance that we just created. The instance we just created is here. The IP address for the instance is this. Let me copy it. Okay, the IP address is, see, it says host name or IP address. I'll call this session Jodhpur. And I need to specify to SSH into this, what is the key file I'm going to use. Look at this private key file for authentication. Now, only those with the private key file would be able to log on or connect to the instance we just created. So the private key is Jodhpur, open. Okay. So in PuTTY, what I am saying is I would like to connect to this IP address using the security file that we just downloaded from the server, jodhpur.ppk. We downloaded jodhpur.pem, but I created jodhpur.ppk from this PEM file using PuTTY gen, and I'm using now PuTTY to connect to that server. Okay, so I'm going to save this Jodhpur first, and then I say open. It's now going to connect. Okay, it is not cached in the registry, but that's all right. That's not an issue. So I'm going to say yes. And the default user is EC2-user. Now, this may vary from the cloud provider to cloud provider, but this is it. Now I have created an instance or a virtual machine, and I have connected to the virtual machine through PuTTY. I used PuTTY. I converted that PEM file to PPK file and used PuTTY because I'm using Windows. If you are using Mac, you can simply use the PEM file and do a direct connect using the terminal in Mac. So that is easier if you are using Mac, whereas here it's not very complex. You just need to download PuTTY, use PuTTY gen to convert, and then configure PuTTY using the PPK file and the IP address, and then you are connected. Let's look at this ls. Now, what is the working directory now? Okay, so let me just zoom here. Okay. So here it is. I'm zooming here. The present working directory is this. There is nothing in this directory. Let me go one step higher. These are basic Linux commands. I'm sure all you guys are familiar with it. Okay, let me go to the root folder. I say cd / I am in the root folder. I do a directory. Okay, so now I am connected to the Linux server I just created. I mean, imagine this. You can even create a supercomputer, a massive supercomputer in 5 minutes if you have the money, and then connect to it using SSH in no time. So this is the beginning of the cloud computing for you guys and gals. So this concludes the first part of creating the EC2 instance. Okay, now before I install Nginx, I want to show you a typical web architecture. Now this is, there are all types of architectural differences, but I have chosen this because it is easy and pretty typically used everywhere. That's why I chose this. Okay, let me play this slide for you. Okay, here it is. So a web client, in this case, could be your laptop, desktop, or an app, or mobile web, or even another server. And another server may be requesting the services of an Nginx web server. Now let's start with what is the type of request that is being sent from the web client, the browser, to the web server. The web server is the entry point on the server side for your application. The web server, in this case, Nginx, will be listening in a particular port, usually in port 80. So for instance, in the web client, if you type in a domain name, www.cnn.com, that is an HTTP request. All the requests that come from the browser are all HTTP requests. Well, not all the requests. By default, they are all HTTP or HTTPS requests, unless you specify FTP and other kinds of requests. So browser is capable of sending all types of requests. By default is HTTP request or HTTPS. Now, a HTTP request has a header and a body. The header part of an HTTP request would contain the port number, a host name, encoding information, date and time, and let's say authentication, and those kind of information will be there in, and even the information pertaining to cookies and those kind of things will be there on the header part of the HTTP. And the body part of the HTTP request is called payload, and which is where all the data pertaining to that request is sent. So I will show you what is there in the header and the body when I demonstrate the postman to you. So what you need to understand is, on the server side of your application, see, this whole thing is on the server side. On the server side of your application, the web server is waiting and listening to port 80 to see if there is an HTTP request emerging from a web client. In other words, a web server is a mere HTTP request processor. For example, if the request is cnn.com, the web server knows, oh, this is a request for an HTML file, an index file, or the landing page. So all it does is sends back a response, a HTML file. So the request is a HTTP request and the response is an HTML response. So that's what Nginx does. On the contrary, if the HTTP request is some kind of a request for processing an API or an API call, as it is called, then Nginx knows from the path of the request that, oh, this is an API call and it needs to be sent to the server that hosts the APIs. It may be in the same virtual machine, or it may be in a different VM. It may be somewhere else in some part of the world. It doesn't matter. So the APIs may be running either in the same VM as the web server, or it may be in a completely different VM somewhere else in some part of the world. So the web server knows, oh, as soon as it sees a request for an API to be processed, from the configuration file, it knows, oh, this is a request for API, so I'm going to send it to, for instance, in our case, an Express server. An Express server, a Node.js API, uses an Express framework, and the Express server will be listening here in another port. So Nginx will say, oh, this is an API request, I'm going to send it or route it to the Express server that is listening here. Now, when you look at it here, the containers are here. You know, this is, as I said, one way of implementing containers. There are other ways of implementing containers. For example, the web server itself may be in a container. So now we'll get into those details when we discuss containers. And I have requested our invited guests to address the containers and how APIs may be containerized. And the data store is the database. So from here, the request may be sent for database, the data retrieval, and the database is going to return the data, and it is sent back to the web server, and the web server sends it back as a HTML response to the web client. Remember, the only thing the web client understands is HTML and JavaScript. It doesn't understand anything else. So all the requests sent back would be HTML and JavaScript. That's what a browser can interpret. So that This is a typical framework. The most important thing you need to understand is this part of it is on the server side. And on the server side, the first entry point to your app is the web server. It's listening and waiting for HTTP requests. It's listening at port 80 and it's listening and waiting for HTTP requests. As soon as an HTTP request is received, from the header information, it knows what it needs to do, either simply return an HTML file or route the request to a server that is listening on another port, which processes all the APIs. So that is the gist of the simple web architecture. Okay, web architecture can get very complex, especially if microservices and more containerization and web services are included. So, and then all these things could be sitting and serving in several different VMs around the world. So it's pretty complex, but let's begin with something so basic so that we can see how Nginx works. Okay, so that's what I'm going to show next, how Nginx works. Okay, now let's go and install Nginx in the instance we just created. Okay, here is the instance. I hope you guys remember the instance we created. First, I'm going to install Nginx before we turn it on and see how it responds. The best way to install Nginx is pretty straightforward. Simply say sudo. Let me zoom a little bit of the screen so you can see it. Okay. Geez, 225%. That is a lot. Okay, I think this is better. Okay. So let me go and install Nginx here in our Amazon instance or the VM just be created. All I need to do is simply say sudo yum install Nginx. Let me move this away from here. Okay. Okay, sudo yum install Nginx. Let's see what happens. Okay, there is a problem. Okay, this was expected. You know, it's not an issue. So all it says is before I install Nginx, I need to install the Amazon Linux extras and also install Nginx. So I should install these Amazon Linux extras and then install the Nginx. So all I need to do is just copy and paste this, pretty straightforward. Okay, for this. So sudo, now let me shoot it. It's collecting all the files required and it's asking me, it is going to take 6.6 MB. Is this okay? I'm going to say, yes, it's okay. Install Nginx for me. It should install in a jiffy. That's it, done. Nginx is installed. Our web server is installed. So how does this work now? Okay. So let me shut down this. Okay, so now Nginx is installed, which means we have a web server that is ready to listen in port 80. Now, before we do assume that it is going to listen in port 80, we need to take a look at the configuration file. So I'm going to show you some basic commands that you will have to use to make sure that Nginx is one, set up correctly, two, it is up and running. And let's do this. I'm going to first of all see whether Nginx is running. The best way to check whether Nginx is running is simply saying service Nginx status. I guess I need to zoom the screen a little bit. Okay. So service, let me zoom one more, fine. Okay, this will do the job. Okay, service Nginx status. Okay, hold on. Service Nginx status. Okay, if you see this, it says Nginx is disabled. Nginx is not up and running, which means I need to start Nginx. All I did was install Nginx, so I'm going to start Nginx. All I need to do is service Nginx start. Okay, failed to start Nginx. As usual, the problem is I should have said sudo service Nginx start. Okay, now Nginx is starting. It is started. So now let's check whether Nginx is up and running. I'm going to see. Okay, service Nginx status. Okay, here it is. Now Nginx is running. It is active, running since 10 seconds ago. 3:41 UTC. This is, I guess, British time. So it's been running now for 10 seconds. Nginx can run for years together without failing. Okay. Now, if Nginx is running, as I told you, it's an HTTP processor and it is listening in port 80. So if I go type in the IP address on the browser, shouldn't I be able to see the index file by default that comes with the Nginx? I should, isn't it? So let's do this. Let me go and type in the IP address and see if my browser is able to access the default index file or the default HTML file that comes with Nginx. Because now that Nginx is up and running, listening in port 80 in this IP address. Let me go and see, copy this IP address. See here. I know it's not going to work. I'm just trying to make an important point here. It's not going to work. See, it keeps rotating. It's going to finally come and tell me, nope, it's not going to work. There is a reason for it. Let me wait for this to come back and tell me, okay, the site cannot be reached. The problem. Okay, the problem is, remember the security group we created. I'll go to the instances and the security groups and so on. Oh, here it is. We are right on this instance. Let me look at security. Okay, I created a security group for this instance. So let's go look at the security group for this instance. Instances running is 3. The security group for this instance is, okay, Jodhpur. It should have been Jodhpur. I misspelled it, Jodhput, Jodhput. The instance is now allowing only SSH. It doesn't allow HTTP requests. Now I have to go and specify in the security group Jodhput that this should be accepting HTTP requests. So let's go to security groups here. Okay, where is the security group? Jodhput. Okay, here it is, Jodhput. It's got inbound rules and outbound rules. Inbound rules is what is allowed when the web server is listening. I'm going to say edit the inbound rules. Okay, if you see this, the only type of connection that this instance is accepting is SSH. I need to go and specify, yes, this instance must also accept HTTP requests. So I'm going to do an add rule and say, oh, okay, HTTP must be somewhere here. Oh, here it is, HTTP. So as soon as I said HTTP, it is going to by default put in port 80. And I'm going to say the IP addresses are going to be in this format. I'm going to say save rules. Okay. Now the instance can accept both SSH and HTTP. SSH access was given to us by default when we created the instance, because otherwise you can't connect to the instance. So it is given to you by default. Other types of requests to be accepted, you need to go and change the security rule here to say that, oh, accept HTTP. If you want to accept HTTPS, you have to mention HTTPS also. Okay. Now let me go and say, sometimes this doesn't take effect immediately. So I'm going to go and say here, say, okay, look at that now. Now that the Nginx is configured to accept HTTP requests, it is showing the default HTML page So now I am going to show you where this HTML page comes from and whether it can be changed, the location of this HTML page, and what determines the location and so on and so forth. Those pieces of information sit in the configuration file for Nginx. Okay. Now, how do I find out where the configuration file is for this Nginx web server? Let's do this. Let me zoom a little bit. Okay, I think this level of zoom is enough. Move this guy far away. Okay. Now, how do I find out where the configuration file is? So far, I have introduced you to a couple of commands, service Nginx start, service Nginx status. So Nginx is running, service Nginx starts the Nginx. So now the Nginx is up and running. Now I need to know what configuration file this Nginx is using. There is a command, sudo Nginx. Oh, before we get into that, I want to see what version of Nginx it has installed. Obviously, the latest version. The command for that is Nginx. Okay, that says Nginx version 1.20, which is the latest. Now I'm going to see, now I want to know where the configuration file that this Nginx is using. And the command for that is, I'm going to say Nginx-T. This is a command used to test whether everything in the configuration file is okay. So it's going to say, oh, the configuration file is in location ABCD. I tested it. It's okay or not okay, and so on. So, okay. Look at this. Nginx configuration syntax is okay. It does provide a lot of information. Don't worry about these kind of things right now. Okay, permission denied. Okay, fine. Expected as expected. That's okay. So all I need to do is say sudo. These are basic Linux commands. Okay, here it is. Now, no issues here. It says the configuration file is in this folder, in this directory, etc. Nginx, nginx.conf. That is the configuration file for Nginx. So let's take a look at what is there in the configuration file in Nginx. Let's move to this folder here, this directory here. All I need to do is do this. It comes here. I'm going to save. Okay, let's see what is in this. Okay, the configuration file is called nginx.conf. Look at this. That is the configuration file. So let me go and check the configuration file here. Where is this? Oh, here it is, nginx.conf. Let's see what is there in nginx.conf. So I'm going to use the cat command. Oh, quite a good. Okay. Okay, this is the configuration file. Let me just focus on what is important. There's so much information here. So much of what is here won't be used for basic configuration, but when we go into the advanced configuration and so on, you'll be using some of this. But right now, let's just look at the basic configuration. It says listen in port 80. That's a default port. Now, if you want the Nginx to listen in a different port, you can say, yeah, I want this to listen in a different port. But I told you port 80 is the standard. So don't change this unless you want to change it to 90 and then tell everybody, oh, we are not using the standard port 90 and so on and so forth. I don't recommend it. So listen to, it says, it is telling Nginx that Nginx should listen in port 80. And the root folder is user share Nginx HTML. In other words, it is going to go to this folder, user share Nginx HTML, and then find out whether there is an index.html there, and it's going to display that. And that is what you get out of here. Okay, so This HTML file comes from here. See this user share Nginx HTML. From this folder, there is an index.html file that is coming. So if we go and change it, you will see that this is changing. Okay, so it says this page used to test the proper. Okay, so let's go and see the content of the HTML file. That will help us understand. Okay, so let's go here. Okay, so it is user share Nginx index, Nginx HTML. Okay, okay. So let me go into this. Okay, so I am in this. Let's see whether there is an index.html here. There it is, index.html. Let me go and change the index.html and then see whether the change is reflected on the browser. So say I use VI editor. Okay, so this is the HTML file. Actually, before we get into this, let me show you something. To check whether the index file is being responded properly by Nginx, you just have to do curl localhost. See, which means it is serving the HTML page. This is the HTML page. So this is the HTML page, so it is serving it well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the index.html. So let's do the change in the index.html. Index.html. Okay. Okay, here it is. You know, it's just showing this page is used to test the proper operation of the Nginx HTTP server. Let me go and change this to see if the change is reflected. It means that the web server installed at this site is working. Let's say this class is boring. Okay, so I added this. So let's go to the browser. Okay, problem. Okay, so this is how the index page looked before. Now I changed it. So let me go and see what page is now being delivered. Now that I changed the index.html. If you can read this page, it means that it read this page. This page is here. It is. Look at this. The site is working, and I said this class is boring. I added that information there. And this. I added this class is boring here, and I did not see. This was the original HTML page. This is the way it was. I changed it. Now it looks like this. Now if I go and refresh this, it's going to say this class is boring. Okay. So now I have shown you how to identify the location of the configuration file. And I also did a small change in the index.html and showed you how it displays on the browser after changing it. So that is to make sure that the configuration, the changes are actually done and reflected. Now, if I go and say stop Nginx, sudo service Nginx stop. Okay, Nginx services are now stopped. Let me go and do this. What is that? 30. Okay, this is the IP address. Now let me go and see what happens. You see this? The Nginx is stopped. It's not working. You can wait forever. It's not going to work. It's going to come back in a couple of seconds and say, no, not found. Okay, the site can be reached. That's because Nginx is stopped. I can go restart Nginx. Sudo service stop, sudo service Nginx start. Fine. Okay, it may take a couple of seconds, I guess. Did I say start or stop? Sudo service Nginx start. Okay, I did start it. This is supposed to. Okay, sometimes what I have seen is in my Windows machine, I have this problem. Let me see. Okay, it sometimes take a few minutes. So to avoid this issue, what experts usually do is they don't stop and restart. What they do, okay, I can check here, curl. Yeah, it is delivering the page, so it's working. Okay, now if I do sudo service Nginx stop, so I stop Nginx. And if I do curl, it's not going to deliver the page. Yep. That means the Nginx is not up and running, so it's not going to do. So I have to say start. The page is delivered. Okay. So that's what happens. This is how you start and stop and restart Nginx. And the best way to reload changes made to the Nginx configuration file without stopping Nginx server is a command called reload. All you need to do is sudo Nginx, sudo service Nginx. Oh, sorry. Okay, this will reload the configuration file without interrupting service. It won't stop and restart. It will only refresh the configuration file. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to show you the final part of this video. In this, I'm going to show you how to point your domain name to the IP address we created. You'll have to go and modify the DNS entry with whoever you have registered your domain name. So we go put the IP address there, and then I'm also going to show how to use Postman. Okay, so that's what's going to happen in this. Let's take a look at it. Okay, so I borrowed a domain name from one of my friends. He has his domain name parked in Google. So google.com/domains. Okay, my domains. Okay, the one domain name I borrowed from him was this one, Wealth Sign. Okay, pretty straightforward here. Go to this DNS, and here is this manage custom records. The wealthsign.com, the A record is pointing to 3.145.51.190. That was the IP address that was assigned. See, 3.145.51.190. So you put the IP address here and simply say save, done. Okay, now when I type in wealthsign.com, I should see this default HTML page that comes with the Nginx server. Okay, wealthsign.com. Okay, here it is. Okay, remember, I put in that just to make sure that you guys remember, this class is boring. You see that? And just to demonstrate again, if I were to simply go and say sudo service Nginx stop, this is not going to work. Yep. Now, if I restart Nginx, okay, now it should work. Oh, already. Wow, that was pretty fast. Okay, so, you know, by stopping and starting Nginx, I have demonstrated to you that Nginx is listening to the HTTP requests from a web client, which may be a browser, laptop, browser on laptop, browser on desktop, or it could be an app, or it could be another server, or it could even be a Postman, an application like Postman. That's the next thing I'm going to show you. Now, before I do that, I wanted to show you an actual configuration file, Nginx configuration file from a production environment. Let me see if I can get into a production environment and show you. This is one of my friend's application, not Notepad, come on. Party, yes, something called this. Okay, I'm going to show you. Okay, so let me show you a production quality configuration file. Like I said, I don't know where the configuration file is. All I'm going to do is sudo Nginx-t. This will tell me whether the configuration file is okay and where it is. Okay, the configuration file syntax is okay, and it's same place ct nginx nginx-conf. So I'm going to move here. Okay, so this is a little better. Let's move this guy out of here. Come on. Okay, so this is the configuration file. Let's see what is the configuration file here. Okay, nginx.conf cat nginx. Okay, so if you look at the Nginx configuration file here, there is probably an include statement here. Okay, here it is. Look at this include, etc. Nginx types, blah, blah, blah. Then there is this, look at this, include, etc. Nginx conf d and more configuration files. It's including more configuration files into this. So, etc. Nginx conf d. Okay. So I'm in etc. I'm going to move to the next folder, conf d, cd conf d. Because he's including more Nginx configurations files from this folder. Let's look at this. Okay, yes, this thing called chatpencil.conf. Let's take a look at chatpencil.conf. Okay, if you look at here, he has, okay, look at this. He has these things called location/registration and then doing something here. He's forwarding that request. Now, this is an API request. So the actual domain names.com will take you to the home page, whereas domain name.com/registration is going to send this to this IP address. It's a local IP address, and to port 7000 and to port 880 and so on. So this is the way Nginx routes API calls. See, here it says location/registration. If it is homepage/registration, send the request to here. Okay. If the request is homepage/server, blah, 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 send the request here. You see, look at this. Location/test, send the request here. Location homepage/MISC/API, send it here. Okay. So he's got his configuration file set up to route the incoming HTTP request to different other ports depending on what the particular API is. If the API is for registration purposes, all those API calls will be routed here. If it is for test purposes, it will be routed here. And here, if the API route is MISC/API, it is going to be routed to this port. So this is how routing happens in Nginx. So that's the reason why I had to teach you this before you take your API class. The API class, he may address this a little bit more in detail. Okay. Now, having shown you this, I would like to show you how to use Postman to test APIs without writing a single line of code. So let's do this. Okay. Let me bring Postman up. Here it is. Okay, here is the Postman. As you see, you can download and install it. It is a free open source software. For example, here is an API. He's working on this project. Here is an API for registration, validating some code. Code is equal to 100. This is what is called an API endpoint. This URL is usually called an API endpoint. So you see this word registration here. This word registration appeared on the configuration file, and it said if it was the home page/registration, it is going to route this request to a particular port in the configuration file that I just showed you. Now somebody says, oh, I have completed this API, you can go and test it. Now the end users can test this. Anybody can download and install Postman, and they can test the APIs to see if the APIs are working. All they need to know is know this endpoint and say, okay, HTTP blah, blah, blah /registration. That is important. If you misspell it, it won't work. The endpoint has to be accurately specified. So we would like to know if this API is really working. Okay, so the code being sent is 100. If the code is sent 200, we don't know what happens. Let's see, for 100, he says it is a valid code. Let's do this send. Okay, look at this. It says the result out of this is in a JSON format. The error is false. Status is 200. That means everything is okay. These are standard statuses. Don't create your own statuses. Status 200 means it's okay. And it says, yeah, invite code is true. It is valid. Invite code 100. So he's sending some details, some university name, institute, blah, blah, blah. Those kind of things he sent. Now, what is remember I told you it has two pieces of information, body and header, a HTTP request and a response as body and header. Let's see what is there in the header. As I told you, in the header, it has got date and time. Here it is. Content type, it's obviously sending a JSON. Look at this. It is coming from an Nginx server, 1.12. Looks like it's an old Nginx server. The one that we installed is 1.20. Connection, keep alive, and so on and so forth. Look at this Express. This means it is using an Express server. That is what the invited guest is going to use. He is going to use Node APIs using Express framework or the Express server. Okay, so for code 100, it is valid. Let me go and put code 200 and see what happens. Let's put code 500. Code 500 must be invalid. Okay, bye. It says it's a bad gateway, it is not working. So obviously Nginx 1.2, blah, blah, blah. So code 500 is invalid, so it is returning invalid. So this is how one can use Postman to actually test whether an API is working or not. Postman is pretty easy to download and install. All you need is an endpoint for the API from the API developer. Now, as I told you early on, if there is something wrong here and it is not working, the API developer may say, no, the issue is with the front end, the way the API is being called. The front end person may say, no, I'm calling the API the way that he wants to or she wants to, that's not working. Now you can bring these two people together and then sit with them and say, okay, I'm going to look at how the calls are routed to the APIs from the Nginx. If the routing is okay, then the problem is with the backend. If the routing itself is not working, then the way in which the Nginx is configured or the way in which these APIs are called, that is a problem. Okay. Now, this is the basic architecture of the web you need to know, and also the basic informations about Nginx. These are the things you need to know to understand the forthcoming classes. Now, as usual, if you have questions, if you have issues, please let me know, send me an email. I'll help you out as much as possible before the beginning of the API classes, okay? Everybody enjoy the day and I'll talk to you later. Bye.